Is the story great? Awesome. Would I want to watch it? Great. Do I want to spend the next few years making it? Yes. All right. At that point, we're in. We just need to work out how it's going to work, right? And sometimes the first plan is not the one that ends up going into production. The industry is really afraid of innovation and change, generally speaking. If you've got something that makes sense and you can see a clear path to it and it adds up and you can't get traditional buy-in, don't let that stop you. Now more than ever, I think the opportunity to actually roll something different out is unprecedented. I can't make a film that competes with a 30-second TikTok video. I just can't. The trick, I think, from now on, it's always been this, but now it's an imperative, is finding the audience for what you're doing and hanging on to them, as opposed to trying to find the widest, broadest audience possible.
Welcome to the podcast, Enzo Tedeschi.
Yeah, thanks, mate. It's always good to chat with you.
You're a director, producer, and writer at Deadhouse Films, primarily working across horror and documentary, which is an awesome combination. I think it's really interesting how you're always pushing the boundary on new business models, new ways of strategizing audiences, and even incorporating new technology into production processes. All the way from your 2011 feature film, The Tunnel, which has now been seen by over 25 million people across the globe, to your most recent projects, including It Will Find You. But let's get started with The Tunnel. For those who have been living under a rock, what is that project and what made it so unique?
The Tunnel was a horror film that myself and my co-writer and co-producer Julian Harvey made in 2011, I think was the release date. So it's been a while now, but it was something that we had come up with because we wanted to make our first film. We were working a lot in lifestyle TV as editors, and so we just wanted to sort of break out and do something on a narrative. But as we were trying to work out how to pull it together and get it greenlit, get some money to make the thing, always leaning on our strengths and the resources that we had available to us. So we knew we could make it on very little if we needed to. We just found that, especially because we were essentially nobodies in the film industry at the time, it was challenging and the numbers just didn't seem to make sense. This was at a time when, DVDs were falling off a cliff. The sky was falling in a completely different way than it's falling now. And so we just kind of concocted this idea that if we leaned into something that was just coming in at the time, which was crowdfunding, that maybe there was a way to pitch this that was really interesting from a marketing point of view. And we ended up being Australia's first crowdfunded feature film, not by running a Kickstarter or anything like that, but we actually built a website where we could pre-sell individual, unique frames of the film to everybody. $1 would buy you a frame. We figured 135,000 frames in a film, and if we raised that money, we could go and make a movie. We also promised that we would release the film for free online, which now doesn't seem like such a polemic, but at the time was kind of a big deal. So yeah, it just kind of caught fire. Now it's the project that precedes me into any room for whatever reason. So
at the time, that was so groundbreaking. You were crowdfunding, you were selling frames, you were releasing online. I know there were questions around torrents and release windows and distribution and butting heads against traditional distributors, how you were going to make money. What did you learn from that whole experience that you're now continuing to use in the projects today?
The one thing that we were really naive and optimistic about at the time was that if we just laid a good enough plan in front of people that incorporated this free release and we could show them how it all worked and show them where the money was going to come from, not just for us, but for them too, that the audience was there and this was going to work and we're not cannibalizing and it actually makes sense to day and date this sort of a release and blah, 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 blah. We thought if we could put a compelling enough case in front of, quote unquote, the powers that be, whatever that means, that we could sort of bridge this old world and this new world of digital stuff that was just coming to the fore. YouTube was only a few years old at the time, right? So it's very early days. We thought it was working until we kind of got very firmly put in our place, and not just put in our place, but I feel like kind of punished as well for trying to even do something like that, we basically at the 11th hour, we had traditional distributors backing us on the home release for the tunnel. We had all of these DVDs printed ready in a warehouse. I think it was something like 20,000. It was some huge number to us at the time that was ready to ship on day one. It was tracking well, a whole bunch of interest. Pre-orders even. I think half of those DVDs were already allocated for pre-orders into the retailers. And then the powers that be, I guess the retailers and the video stores and whatever, decided that they didn't like the sound of what we were doing. I guess maybe they didn't like the BitTorrent aspect or something, but they're like, yeah, we've had orders pulled. And I'm like, cool. Well, we were tracking at 20,000 units last week. What are we tracking at now? And they just held up this. I was like, all of our orders have been pulled. So they just completely and utterly shut us down. And I reckon cost us multiple tens of thousands of units in DVD sales, which was the entire time what we had pointed to as going, that's where we're going to actually make some money. And we had that robbed from us from some short-sighted people who didn't understand the nuance between us giving somebody permission to share our film online versus somebody stealing the film. What I learnt from that is the industry is really afraid of innovation and change, generally speaking. And so if you've got an idea, if you've got something that makes sense and you can see a clear path to it and it adds up, and you're not going to, blow a bunch of other people's money and you can't get traditional buy-in, don't let that stop you. I've always been terrible at waiting for permission to do things. I'd rather ask for forgiveness 99% of the time. So I think it's that. It's like, don't ask for permission. If it makes sense, because and it adds up, you're probably onto something. And now more than ever, I think the opportunity to actually roll something different out without it compromising you in the long run is unprecedented.
And I love the way that you've always been on that forefront of what could be done differently. How can we do this in another way? But you also have bridged that gap to what people might call the traditional industry and have carved your pathway there as well. So I'm really interested in talking about those business models. What do they look like currently, as much as you're able to share?
Yeah, look, it's challenging because it varies from project to project, right? A lot of people come to me asking for advice about crowdfunding, for example, and 9 times out of 10, the advice is don't do it. You've done it yourself. It's really difficult, and people see it as a way to access free money, but it's not. It's a way to build audience, really is what it is, and get people's buy-in from really early. So if you don't have a project where that's appropriate, that's going to be really difficult for you to do. We've got 2 films, one that's rolling out at the moment doing festivals, which is an Indigenous creature feature called It Will Find You. That was a kind of a pretty traditionally put together finance plan in terms of some private money, producer offset, put that all together, you're off and you make a movie in that sort of vein, complete with offset lenders and all the fun stuff that goes with that kind of a model. But then we've also got a much, I guess, in some ways a smaller film, more humble in budget, but more ambitious in scale, which is a sci-fi that has a crap ton of VFX in it, which we would probably never even have attempted maybe 5 years ago. That one's just been very much a pay as you go. We're just finding ways to pay for it as we move along. So that's not necessarily a bankable entrepreneurial kind of business model that's always repeatable, but it felt right for that project. Partially driven by some time pressures that we had in production as well, because we had limited access to a location, which we were going to lose. So we just sort of pulled it together and ran with it. It's different for everything, and it really depends on, I think, your goals with making the project. So when we made the tunnel, for example, making a bunch of money was so low on the list for us of priorities, like anything that could get that in front of more eyeballs, that was priority number one. We just wanted to put ourselves on the map as filmmakers. And so we took all of those options when they came along, and knocked back, some options that could have made us a significant amount of money if we broke some of our promises that we'd made. Like if we pulled the free release, I remember having a sales agent tell us they could go and get us all of this money in sales, but We just had to promise not to release it for free. But after having crowdfunded to, tens of thousands of people for all of that money and made this promise, we just didn't feel like we could break that. And the audience was more valuable to us than the dollars. So yeah, I guess just being open to playing with things and, not just doing things the way they've always been done just because that's the way they've always been done. It's like pull it apart, put it back together. If it still works, great. If it doesn't, find another way. We have that advantage, I guess, being a smaller company that we can sort of play things that way.
That has always been almost a deliberate strategy for you, is to stay small and agile so that you can try new things. Is that deliberate?
To some degree it is. We've had stages where we've grown and built very, very quickly in a short period of time and then receded back. We had a couple of years where we had pushed out four features in about 2.5 years, or feature length web series in about 4.5 years, to the tune of $5 or $6 million, which for us at the time was a huge spike, right? And we were set to start building on that. There was a model, it was repeatable. We had relationships that were growing and burgeoning, and it was doing all sorts of wonderful things. And then COVID. So small and agile, I think, is really important, especially when you're working at certain budget levels as well. Like we wouldn't be able to go, sure, let's just throw some money at this thing and go and make it. Don't worry about spending the next 12 months raising finance and trying to convince other people it's a good idea. Let's just go and do it. And then they'll see that it's a good idea and we can sort out the distribution stuff later. You just would not have the opportunity to do that if you didn't keep yourself to some degree lean and agile. But, at our peak, when we had 2 feature projects running at the same time, literally shooting at the same time. And the office that we had in Lane Cove had maybe 50, 60 people on any given day in there during that period. It was really quite intense and awesome.
So for those who don't know Deadhouse well, what does your slate generally look like? What's the size of the company? What types of projects are you working on?
At its inception, Deadhouse was basically a way for me to brand the horror and genre content that we were making at the time. So this was off the back of made The Tunnel, my previous company, with Jules, and we also made a web series called Event Zero, which was like a action thriller kind of thing with one of the pay TV channels for YouTube. I founded Deadhouse to sort of enable that and really put a firm branding on the genre kind of aspect of what I was doing. At any given time, the slate does look like a whole bunch of genre pieces. Even if they're not straight horror films, there's always a bit of a tone. There's a dark kind of tone to what's going on. It's varied, but it's usually sits in that space. Helen Tuck has recently started with the company, so she's come on board, and we're looking to sort of broaden the scope of the slate a little bit into other areas as well, not just genre, which is hilarious because I feel like I see most people around me doing exactly the opposite.
Given where the market is at the moment, is most of your income coming back from sales? Is it direct to audience?
At the moment, we're leveraging a lot of past projects in interesting ways. Umbrella re-released The Tunnel after 14, 15 years, and it was a big deluxe limited edition that I looked at the price tag and went, that's a little bit absurdly, ridiculously priced, and it sold out within a couple of days. North American version did the same thing. I think a lot of it's about momentum, especially... traditionally we've worked at reasonably low budget levels as well, right? We haven't made $5-10 million projects. That's not to say we won't, but we haven't to date. When you don't have a lot of money, you do have to move faster. You kind of need to learn, I guess, what corners you can cut without damaging this thing that you're trying to bring to life. And so it does become about momentum, because the more you're out there doing, the more you're seen, the more you attract stuff, the more people are interested in what you're doing and what you have done. In some ways, it's just the power of being active and being out there doing just about anything, really.
Can we talk about horror? Because it feels like there's been a real shift towards horror and towards genre in the market in recent years. And it's something you've been doing for over a decade. How are you seeing that shift?
Somewhat with glee, but also with interest. I feel like internationally it's always been a thing. It's always been somewhat of an evergreen genre, and there are subgenres within that are pretty evergreen as well. horror fans are really rabid about what they do and what they love and what they want to see more of. And I think it's probably unique in that more than a lot of other genres, people will watch a lot of crap or things that they don't like to get to the stuff that they do like. And so there's always a volume that's required. Having said that, I think the recent shift has been helped by obvious breakout successes like Talk to Me, which went gangbusters, and Daniel and Michael deserve every good thing that's coming their way. They're incredible, and they've built an overnight success over a decade or more of working really, really hard. So they're really great at what they do, and they deserve it. But it's interesting that because that's taken off, I think there's been this new eye turned onto Australian horror and going, give us more, give us more. And so two things happen when you do that. One is you have this amazing new talent that is often given a chance where it might not have been given a chance before. But there's also a lot of players or some players that are coming into the space really cynically that don't really understand it. And so the results that they're producing are not that great. Probably looks amazing, but what's there is not substantive. I've seen it a lot of times in Hollywood where they'll remake something or they'll jump into a genre because it's hot and it's trending, but then they focus on all of the wrong things and they leave all the gold on the table. There's a little bit of Johnny come lately sort of stuff that I'm seeing coming through from people that have had nothing to do with the genre, and that's not me being snobbish. It's just what I'm seeing, right?
So let's talk about community, because I think there's been a common thread with a lot of your projects, whether they've been in the genre space or the documentary space, of building a community around the project in order to, I guess, enhance the distribution or the marketing strategy. How have you approached community, or is it something that you've recognized in hindsight?
To be honest, I think a lot of it is hindsight at the moment. I think the one thing that I probably could have done a heap better is maintained a regular contact or communication with those early backers from the first film. And that's not to say that we haven't. Like, I still recognize names in and around our socials or our email lists today, especially the first batch of them. A lot of them are ingrained in my brain forever, and I recognize them on site. It's a funny thing. But what I have seen from working with some of the doco makers that I have on some of the projects is when they have been diligent about maintaining their audience and making sure that they're, spoken to, fed with content, whatever it is that you need to do to keep growing that email database. The first Food Matters film, for example, that I made with James and Laurentine back in, before the tunnel even, that went from 0 to 100 really, really quickly. And off the back of that email list that they generated with a lot of hard work on the first film, when it came to following up a few years later with the sequel, they were able to have, to my understanding, something like $1 million launch for that. And that was direct to customer, no traditional distribution. That was 100% just looking after the people that were looking after them, right? One of the things that the Food Matters crew does really well when they make a documentary is they cast their interviews with marketing in mind. And what I mean by that is you can rest assured that any face that appears in any of those documentaries as an expert probably is sitting on a mega email database, right? Which, when it comes down to release time, that's a few million emails that goes out, and that's one person. And you have 10 people interviewed as all positioning themselves as experts, so it's in their best interest to promote themselves. They will be able to market the project to, multiple email databases with probably multiple millions of people each, and suddenly you sort of go, well, that's going to find its way in the world, right? There's a strategy that's starting to appear with film. I mean, it's been a while now where people are starting to cast influencers or YouTubers in films. And I don't think it works quite the same way for a couple of reasons. Generally speaking, I think these people don't have that direct access to talk to their audience, like as a direct email, like these other people do. And I think that it's a lot harder to get people motivated and off the couch to go and see something if they're watching a YouTube video at home rather than, getting a direct piece of communication. So that's a factor. It's a different craft as well. Acting is a totally different thing to presenting a YouTube video. Some people can do it. A lot of them can't, right? And so I think casting by social media numbers is a trend that I don't love. Can't pretend we don't look at people's social media accounts when we think about casting them, but it's a factor. It's not the factor.
What do you think we can take from documentary into narrative filmmaking in terms of finding and building audiences?
Well, it would be very difficult, I think, to cast a film entirely from influences. I think it's very expensive to cast a film with A-list stars across the board. So for most people, those things, for various reasons, are probably not factors. But when we were making The Tunnel, for example, the story of our crowdfunding campaign and what we were doing was just as important as the story of the film we were making, right? Once we made the film and people were watching it, everything else fell by the wayside. So there's people finding The Tunnel today that weren't even born when the film was made, which is amazing to me. They have no idea about all of that stuff. They just found this weird little gem of a film and put it on and gone, hey, I really enjoyed that, right? But at the time, I think if you don't have names, big numbers, huge marketing budget, any of that sort of stuff, I think you do need to tap into what is the story of the story in some way and make sure you lean into that as much as you lean into the story that you're actually telling. And somewhere in that, they end up kind of feeding each other in a really interesting way. Maybe you don't have a superstar in your film, but if you can find the angle that you can hook a little bit of publicity on, then there's a little feedback loop that happens. And by the time you are releasing the film, people may have more recognition of what you're doing because of that second set of stories that you're telling outside of the film itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it comes down to pitching as well. If you can start telling that story and raising finance, and it's going to carry through to your initial audience and create that traction.
Yeah, absolutely. We try and play the game as much as anybody else. Our film's going out theatrically next year, and we'll be panicking on those first week numbers just like everybody else. But I also know that we'll have something up our sleeve for further down the line when it hits streaming eventually, as it undoubtedly will. Any audience that it might not find theatrically, it'll find there. But the theatrical, unless you've got really, really, really deep pockets, it's hard. So we're doing everything that we can to be present, to support our distributor in every way we can. And I only just wish that we could do more, right? And if we had a deeper relationship with some of our audience and, a direct communication with them, maybe we would be able to be doing more. I think I've been way too distracted by the creative side of things over the years and have not been as good at keeping that up as I have been. And so that's part of our renewed strategy at the moment, is to make sure that those things build and are maintained, and finding ways to loop real life things like, putting people in rooms together and getting them to talk rather than just social media and clips and whatever, I think is going to be a big part of that over the next sort of year or so for us. I'm getting a sense and seeing online that people are just getting really bored of being algorithmed to death.
This episode of We Interrupt This Broadcast is sponsored by AFTRS, the Australian Film, Television and Radio School. For more than 50 years, AFTRS has been working with our industry, always delivering incredible education and training to our Australian storytellers. So if you're looking for a full-time course or a short course, if you want to be on campus or online, anywhere in Australia, AFTRS has a course that's going to suit you.
If you had a new project come to you from a principal's perspective, what would you be thinking about in terms of financing and then that community piece or that audience piece integrated within that?
Question number one is, would I sit down and watch this for a couple of hours, right? And if the answer is yes, then that's one step forward. The next one is where it usually falls down is, do I then want to spend a couple of years bringing this to life? Often the question is probably not. If it passes those two, then my brain starts going into these questions that you're thinking of. So it's always a, story first kind of thing. there is a consideration for audience and market, obviously. Is it going to be something that we can sell? How are we going to try and sell it? Are we going to try and DIY something, or would we try and go the traditional route and get, proper distribution and a sales agent and all of those sort of things? Because I think that the answers to those sorts of questions then dictate a realistic number in terms of budget for the project. And once you have that number, then you try and work out how to fill in the gaps, right?
So how do you make that decision as to which pathway you're going to go down?
It depends on the type of content, who's brought to the table. So if it's an external team that walks in with a ready-made audience, then you've kind of got a certain level of marketing in theory built in. So then what are the things you can do to leverage that marketing? A lot of the projects that we're doing at the moment, we are literally budgeting for not just a social media person and not just a BTS video person, but almost like a full-time documentarian to be there and just cover everything, no matter what happens every day. That's one way of going about it. If there's someone that is making a leap in their career and they have a huge amount of people that they're bringing with them as an audience, maybe a crowdfunding campaign might be in order. That might be a smart way of going about it. I'm not sure. I mean, it's just kind of like case by case, weighing up all of the options, right? We are doing a project at the moment with somebody who's very inexperienced and very young. The script is incredible. On paper and on first impression, when I was talking to Helen about it, I was like, this is going to be a really hard pitch. The central driver, which is the person that's supposed to be the creative, like, I've got this. We can't show a track record. So no matter how much we feel inspired by what he's doing, and we've got complete faith in him, don't get me wrong, like, we know he's going to be able to do this. We wouldn't be getting involved if we didn't. But on paper, it makes no sense. It makes no sense. It's been under 2 months. It's maybe in about 6 weeks, we've managed to get money and distribution, and we're just about to start casting, and we're probably going to be filming in the first quarter of next year. So that's just kind of come out of nowhere, complete left field. And if you had pitched it to me verbally in terms of what was there when it came to us, no matter how good that script was, I'd be going, that's just not today, not in this climate. There's no way. So you just kind of, in the same way that when you're on set directing, you kind of need to leave yourself open to the happy accidents. Like, sometimes you can't plan this stuff, right? It comes to you, and you need to use your gut instincts and your analytical skills to look at all of those things. Everything that you point to is all of the things that you look at, but depending on the project, maybe some things are more important for certain projects than others, right? And we know we're going to be able to market the crap out of that angle as well, where I think perhaps the impulse for another producer might have been to hide that as much as possible.
The inexperience, you mean?
Yeah. 100%. It's all unfolding as we speak. But just as an illustration of the fact that sometimes the decisions are actually quite counterintuitive.
I just want to double click on that a little more, though, because I think you're probably underestimating the decades of experience you have. Let's go out and see what happens, and suddenly you have money to make it. Is that distribution through previous contacts? Is it private finance from people you've worked with before? It doesn't have to be for this project, but what's your general approach when you're like, I need to go find money to make this project?
We've had stuff that's come together before really, really quickly. And I think part of it's just being opportunistic. When we had that really busy period, I had been speaking to somebody about opportunities in a particular space. And it was one of those things where I wasn't sure whether anything was going to come out of the conversation. You're always nice to everybody, but sometimes you just have a gut level feeling where you're going, I don't know, this doesn't feel like it's going to go anywhere. And so he asked me to pitch him a couple of things, and I had these things, and I went, I don't know, what about that? I first met this contact at a film festival in November in France, and then by January, there was money in the bank and we were making Skinford, number one, right? So I could not have strategized or planned my way to that in any way. But, the stuff that we're doing today, we've now got 10 years of history as a company. And, we work a lot with, for example, with Umbrella Entertainment, right? They hold all of our back catalogue. They're releasing the next couple of films for us, including It Will Find You. And so there's a really strong relationship there that I'd like to think that we can maintain moving forward. They're always my first phone call when we've got anything to put to market, and just going to go, what do you reckon? Do you want to come on the ride for this one as well? Never expecting that it's going to be a guaranteed yes. And we have had no's from them, but for the most part, they love what we do and we love how they do what they do. So it just makes sense, right? So you can't underestimate, as you pointed out, the decade or more probably of just working in the space and getting to know people. People have more confidence in you. You have more confidence in them. And in terms of finance, like all of our films usually have a certain degree of private money in them. And so just getting to know people that are willing to put in little bits of money and cobbling something together. But you also need to then, the same way you would cast or crew for a particular project, you kind of need to pick your investors, I think, and know who's going to respond to the pitch and who's not going to respond to the pitch. I did a documentary series that I directed called Founder, which is all about Aussie tech startups. Each episode profiles a different founder and their journey through to creating probably in all cases now, I think they've all gone unicorn since we did the series. But, just being in those rooms with those people with, in some ways, money to burn, and just sort of going, even if I wanted to pitch them something, there's nothing that I would want to make that these people would want to look at, right? But that's not to say that at some point in time, there might not be something that comes along that I'm kind of like, you might want to have a look at this because it might just tick a really big box for you in some way. So it's always about matchmaking in some way, shape or form, I think.
And do you find that tends to be around the creative, or is it the business opportunity for them?
I think it's both. And either, again, it depends on who it is, right? So if you have something that is a really, really smart business opportunity, sometimes the creative doesn't matter. They just sort of go, you want how much? Okay. You'll get it back when? Okay, cool. Deal. Show me how that goes and you can have the money. But sometimes people are involved as EPs or financial EPs because they want to be a part of what's happening. And so it just varies. And I think it's, again, over time, just building a network of connections that you can draw upon. Everyone has their own thing, their own agenda that they're trying to satisfy. It's not necessarily sinister. It's just everybody wants something. So what can you give them that works for both of you,
So I think opportunity has always been a big thing for you, is just being open to opportunity, which I think is not always the case. I think a lot of people find one model or one genre or one production process, and once they've learnt it, they want to stick to that across their career. It feels like you're constantly shifting where you're going, and not just in terms of financing models, but in terms of the way you approach production or what the market or audience opportunities may be. Do you recognize that in yourself, or do you deliberately hone that strategy?
I think I do. I'm always fascinated by the bleeding edge tech and what's happening, and, watching people innovate and evolve in that space over time has been quite a source of inspiration, I think, for just everything that I do. Sometimes things don't translate one to one, but generally speaking, the out of the box thinking that drives some of those technologies and whatever has always fascinated me. I've always been a fan of sci-fi. And so we're living in an age that I don't know if I ever thought I'd live to see, where a lot of the stuff that I was reading about as such distant sci-fi in the distant future when I was a kid or watching films, it's slowly, at accelerating pace, it feels like slowly coming to be. Every single year that passes, we're a little bit closer to all of these crazy sci-fi films and technology. So I definitely have been interested in that always, and that I don't think that interest has waned. So definitely when something like, generative AI comes along or large language models, I'm just fascinated immediately about what's going on there. How does that work? What's it doing? What can it do? Can't it do? Et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if it's a conscious thing that I hone that, but I do, just because it's a personal interest as much as anything else, right? But that invariably ends up coming back and informing what we're doing. So with the project we're doing at the moment, which is Resonance. We're right in the middle, actually, of visual effects on it. This is like 300 plus shots or something of really quite intense VFX. And we've been no stranger to CGI and VFX in the past, but this one's more than ever before. There's no way that with the size of the team that we have and the budget that we have that we would have even dared attempt this even, a few short years ago. But the post-production tools have evolved to the point where we can stop way short of using generative AI to just cheat our way to a final shot, which generally speaking, I think to me still feel quite dull and boring or somewhat lifeless 9 times out of 10, not every time, but most of the time. Whereas we're using tools that have some AI smarts in them and are definitely AI powered, but they're removing a lot of the grunt work. When you have to rotoscope most of those 300 shots, that's a lifetime of work, just staring at frames, moving little lines around, trying to trace people's movements. We can rotoscope dozens and dozens of shots in a day now, quite happily, quite effectively, and pretty close to final, if not final in some instances, right? Now, I don't know about you, but I would, this is an attitude that I've always had with things as well. It's like I would much rather be, employing people to do what they do best and bring value. I would like to see it on the screen and empower these people to spend time doing their best work rather than going, well, I can't do any of that until I've created these layers of people in 300 shots. Whereas what if I can remove most of that from your workload and then you can focus on the really cool stuff and bringing some really interesting stuff to life. So, we're doing things like aging people up and de-aging, but using trained models that we're using their images that we have permission to use and all of that sort of stuff. So we're trying to do it, in ways that make sense and, with people's permission, I guess is probably the best way of putting it. But technology, man, like it's happening whether you like it or not. So get on board is always kind of the attitude I've had.
If you could trace that back across your career, what are some of the key moments where technology advances and your work have intersected?
So absolutely releasing the tunnel on BitTorrent was a huge one. BitTorrent was at its peak for piracy at the time as well. And we did so much work to sort of try and help people understand that the tool was not the criminal act. Like there are companies now still who are, selling peer-to-peer technology for file sharing in work environments. And they're super, super effective because they're fast and they're efficient and they just work just about better than any server that anyone can set up. But because people were using that technology to steal stuff, that was a really, really hard thing to break through. When we stepped out of the Sydney premiere of The Tunnel, which was a full house at Bondi, it was a great night, lots and lots of people. We launched the online release at the same time as that screening, and we were at the drinks after the screening and we just kept refreshing the page and watching the download count go up. It had hit thousands of downloads before we had even walked out of the cinema. We spent the next 3 hours drinking and watching the number climb and climb and climb, which was ridiculous. So that's probably one of the biggest and most significant ones for me because it was an absolute inflection point in my career in so many ways. And, the technology was at the heart of it. I've just always seen that technology stuff as a way of enabling what you have to do as a practitioner rather than a threat. And this isn't just in my career. This goes back hundreds of years now. I think whatever job you think that technology is going to take away, there's probably at least another 1 or 2 jobs that are going to spring up in its place that didn't exist before, generally speaking, that are created by the existence of that technology.
Where do you see the future of the industry at the moment? What are you going to push more into as a company, or where are you going to focus your energy?
I think we're going to focus our energy in making sure that we're always audience building at the same time as whatever we're making. And I mean that as, I think, an umbrella rather than per project. Yes, there's going to be project-specific audiences And I guess that's the advantage of having a brand that suggests a particular type of content, right? It's really hard to, market a kitchen sink drama to someone who's interested in horror movies. I think we're finding a way to perhaps broaden that out so that we can market a certain type of film made by a certain type of person that's a little bit genre agnostic. Australia has a really long and proud history of independent filmmaking because it's more or less the only type of filmmaking we have, right? But you will find filmmakers out there trying to make their film for $5,000 and shooting on weekends, and you'll find people trying to, scrape together a little bit more money, but being super, super ambitious. And we have a long and long proud history of that. But I think in the last 10, 15 years, especially as technology has really enabled people a lot more, we're seeing more of it. Not all of it's great. Some of it's fantastic, what people are doing on very little money. And it kind of feeds into what's happening a little bit with generative AI at the moment. We're kind of living through it at the moment where there's so much of what they call slop out there, right? There's so much trash that is just meaningless pixels on a screen that doesn't really count for a great deal. The novelty factor eventually, I think, is going to wear off. And when it does, and I think some people are already starting to do this, when it does, I think people are going to be going, oh, okay, that was interesting. They're going to unplug a little bit and go, what are the people doing? where are the people making things? And there's definitely going to be an erosion of audience as I see it. I think that's undoubted because there are people that don't necessarily look for production quality or a certain level of artistic sort of whatever you want to call it in a film without getting too highbrow about it. But I think there's always people that are going to be looking for that sort of thing. And even if they do get distracted by this other stuff, I do scroll with the best of them, right? But every now and then I have to unplug because I'm kind of like, I'm bored. I need something. I need a meal. I can't snack my way through life. And so I think that there will be a bit of a return to that. And so we're banking on the fact that when people start looking for stuff, we'll be ready because we'll have stayed the course. It's almost like in a world where audiences are so fragmented and everything is changing so fast, the controversial and challenging thing and possibly smartest thing might be to stay the course a little bit. I might be proven wrong. I don't know, but I feel like that's where things are going to go eventually. And so, are we going to become a Blumhouse as a result? Maybe not, probably not. But, are we going to be able to sustain what we're doing and keep people happily employed making some cool stuff? Maybe, more than likely, I think. And just one more thing that occurs to me on audience, I sometimes feel the one thing that we're all getting wrong when we talk about audience is not acknowledging that there isn't just one audience, there are many. And so when we sit there and talk about, the number of eyeballs that are on TikTok and we have to be on TikTok because everybody's on TikTok, that's what we're competing with. I think that's where I disagree is like, I don't think as filmmakers, I don't think we are competing with TikTok because I can't make a film that competes with a 30-second TikTok video. I just can't. The trick, I think, from now on, it's always been this, but now it's an imperative, is finding the audience for what you're doing and hanging on to them as opposed to trying to find the widest, broadest audience possible, which has sometimes been the thinking, which is, we have to make these films that everybody will watch and we can't offend anyone or upset anyone. It's like, no, let's just do something that is actually feeds a niche and just make sure that we're talking to the right niche is probably makes more sense to me anyway. And if I'm wrong and we do have to make TikToks to compete, then I think that's me tapping out.
Sustaining an independent production company is not easy by any means. What is it for you that you think has made that possible over the past 15 years while still getting to tell stories that you're passionate about?
It's a tricky question to answer because I think at any given time, the solution to the problem that we're up against has been different depending on what the situation or the circumstances. I mean, certainly early on, it was just about being prepared to muck in on anything. at any time. Most of our kids are adults now, but when you have a young family that you're looking after, I might have been happy living on baked beans and toast for a month while something was cooking, but I couldn't do that to my kids, right? So you just get to that attitude of going, well, I can't sit here and go, I can't do this. I have to work out how. So the question becomes, how do I make this work, as opposed to this doesn't work, because all signs point to the fact that it can't. So that's tricky, and that might not be for everybody, but I think there is a little bit of an underline of that all the way through to now, where, if the option is stop doing what you're doing, if you take that option off the table, then what? And sometimes you do have to tighten your belt. I think sometimes the classic model is to have a big space with a whole bunch of resources, and they lie empty a lot of the time when they're not being used. And then there's this flurry of activity that pays for everything and makes it all okay. And then it all goes dead again until the next thing. That's fine if your budgets and your kitty in between is big enough to sustain that. But when you're working on much smaller things, you have to find other ways to bridge that gap. Sometimes it's scaled down and it's just been me, and I've just tightened my belt and just gone, okay, well, this is what it is for the next few months until something else happens. Sometimes it's been, taking on debt into the company when we know there's things coming in a few months' time, but we're not going to be able to last that long unless there's something to see us through, but we know that there's money coming to pay it back. So it's not irresponsible, even though it's still challenging and risky, but then everything's risky. We wouldn't be doing any of this sort of thing if there weren't any risks in it. So the answer, I think, for the most part, I think that underlines all of my decisions is usually just work out how to do it. If you're going to do it, just work out a way. If you really want to do it bad enough, and it comes down to those other questions, right? Is the story great? Awesome. Would I want to watch it? Great. Do I want to spend the next few years making it? Yes. All right. At that point, we just need to work out how it's going to work, right? And sometimes the first plan is not the one that ends up going into production. Things shift and evolve, but if you don't have a huge overhead where you're going, I need to green light something by next week, or, the company runs out of money, then that buffer affords you a little bit of processing and puzzle time to work out how the pieces fit together. I know for me, the reason that I'm here still trying to make films when everybody's proclaiming that the sky's falling is because I love films. I love making films. I love watching films. That's how I grew up. It's what is ingrained in me, and I'm not sure that I know how to do a great deal else.
I love that. We always finish our episodes asking our guests if they have an idea that could change the screen industry for the better. So I would love to know, Enzo, what's your big idea?
I don't know that it's really that big an idea, and it might sound a little naive. I think if we all just opened our minds a little bit to things and not shoot things down because they're unfamiliar or we've not seen them before, I think it's going to be a lot easier to navigate the turbulent times ahead. The same thinking that created the problem is not going to be the thinking that gets you out of it, right? So there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment, probably more than ever in any one time, that everything's happening at once, and there's a lot of turbulence and disruption happening in our industry. And if we bring our thinking from 10 years ago into today's problems, I don't think that's what's going to get us through. So just being a little bit more open-minded. If more people just kind of, stopped worrying about protecting their own turf as a priority and started opening their minds to what might be the next level of things, I think things would get really interesting.
Thank you so much, Enzo. It's been awesome to talk to you.
Yeah, man. It's always a pleasure chatting.
We Interrupt This broadcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation and the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we acknowledge them as the traditional custodians and first storytellers of these regions. Always was, always will be.